So those of you who haven't been introduced to, my name is Suresh Raja, and I'm the medical director of Mitochondrial Rescue. I consider myself to be an integrative rhinologist for the past 7 or 8 years. I am a medical device geek, and I would say my most recent accomplishments would be performing a lot of minimally invasive office-based sinus ventilation procedures. And it was one of those things I started doing about 10 years ago, and you could do something in the office under local anesthesia. It takes 10 minutes, and people who had headaches for forever, the headaches would go away and their allergy symptoms would improve because the mucus-air interface would be opened up in exactly the right anatomical area. That's no big deal for you guys. You guys are doing this kind of stuff all the time energetically. So I just want to say thank you. Thank you, Dr. Cowden, and thank you, Dr. Sconiers and Ann, for having us here. And I'm very humbled. And if you would have told me less than a year before I met our founder, Lilias Hamhera, from the UK, that I would be giving up my current practice to dedicate more time into rescuing as many people as we possibly can, I would say that you're crazy. So this is our product line. We do have 4 products, and we're really proud of all of them. And before we get started, I kind of want to put it together from Lilias's talk yesterday. When we are dosing with these products, we like to consider the fact that the Carnosine Extra here is really the one that's regenerating your power. Okay, that's really the rock star peptide. We're going to go over the ingredients, but the CoQ10 is power. Okay, and the Stimino, it's very good for immune issues, infection issues, as well as inflammation, actually. So just to know, when we dose you, even though the Carnosine Extra is our rock star peptide, we really do like our other products. It's just that you'll see why the Carnosine Extra is so special once we finish. So today's lecture is going to start out by talking about specifically Carnosine Extra and the specific Carnosine Extra research that we have been doing rapid fire over the past 3 or 4 years, and we probably have about 12 or 13 or 14 papers that are just waiting in line to get published from our manufacturing team in the Republic of Serbia. Carnosine Extra does have the L-Carnosine in it. You're going to see that amount listed in some of the research studies quite prominently, 125 milligrams. But it does have some CoQ10, and it does have some bioflavonoids, it does have some L-Carnitine and some vitamin E in it as well, and it is actually that synergistic combination that makes it so powerful. And this is all of the research that we'll be talking towards the end of our discussion will be very specific to our exact proprietary formulation of the Carnosine Extra. And in particular, when we go back to the original provenance, we're really proud of our Russian space medicine provenance. We heard yesterday that Yuri Gagarin, 1961, we started with the heart rate variability. By 1966, they had figured out all the math. Okay, they had figured out how these energies were traveling and what they meant and all that. Didn't take them very long. And it was really about 30 years ago that they spent 15 years and millions of rubles in an effort to take this molecule and get it into the cells more completely, because it is such a pleiotropic, really universal molecule. So we not only have the original testing, we have the original formulation, and we have the latest variant of the testing device that is actually from the time of Yuri Gagarin. So we're very happy with that provenance, and we're not really going to change that anytime soon. So L-Carnosine itself is just a simple dipeptide. It has a L-histidine and a beta-alanine. And historically, L-Carnosine was discovered by the Russians, actually, just to further the provenance about the turn of the century, and they examined it in the meat of many animals and even fish and whales, and it was around the turn of the century, and they had gotten a lot of information about what they would call the histidine-containing dipeptides would be the group, HCD. And really what it is the aromatic ring here, okay, that's very, very effective in gobbling up those heavy metals, and affecting the receptor sites and gobbling up proteins that are laying down in abnormal ways, in bad places. So L-carnosine is what I would call a pleiotropic molecule. You can have certain nutritional deficiencies and you can correct them, and it all makes great sense, but what happens if you have one particular very simple dipeptide that does many different things? And that's what carnosine really is. As you will see, it's a phenomenal scavenger of free radicals, the so-called new ED, the electron dysfunction that we're going to talk about a lot today. It also is a very, very gentle but effective heavy metal chelator. We talked a lot about heavy metals today. It's very, very good for shaking that, copper and zinc and all those heavy metals out of our brain, because it does cross the blood-brain barrier. Okay, so very important to realize that. And also, carnosine itself represents 30% of the entire buffering capacity of our entire organism. So very important to stay more alkaline, as we noted before, but also important for athletic performance. We know that in particular interleukin 8 is modulated by the L-carnosine, and that makes it anti-inflammatory. And just as importantly, we do have sugars, advanced glycated end products that attach to proteins and cause chronic inflammation and tissue damage. Well, not only does the carnosine prevent those sugars from originally cross-linking with the proteins, they also will go to where those sugars are already laid down and gobble it away like Pac-Man. And for me, very importantly, it is like a neurotransmitter. You'll see from our research that literally the Carnosine Extra preparation that we have specifically acts as a brain growth factor. So that's a lot of different things. This is the first study that our manufacturing team came up with several years ago, probably about 5-6 years ago, and we compared our product of Carnosine Extra with pure L-carnosine, and what we found was that our product was vastly superior in how much got into the cells and how long it lasted. Our product with the equivalent dose starts to get absorbed about half an hour, okay, and then lasts a full 12 hours and peaks at about 2. So we have a recent study that didn't make it into this lecture, but it was a UV vis spectroscopy study that analyzed what the original IP was of our Carnosine Extra. What it showed was that it is carnosinase resistant. And because it is such a simple dipeptide, it can circulate around for a very long time. And because it's made by our own bodies, particularly in the heart, in the muscles, and in the brain, it's extraordinarily safe. And actually where it's located in the greatest quantity is where we require the most mitochondria. So it all makes one big nice circle. I have that study available for anybody who wants to see it on my phone, on my Google Drive. Send it to you. This is a good resource. This was set up by our manufacturing partners as a nonprofit. It already links over 2,000 different PubMed articles regarding carnosine, and it separates it by category of exactly what it can do. We believe that our Carnosine Extra is the substance of the 21st century, just to just throw it out there. Okay, so what does carnosine do if you have disease? Well, let's define what it is to be healthy. Okay, in order to have health, we need to have good structure. Our proteins need to stay folded. They can't be unfolded. They can't have things attaching to them that make them unfold and they won't work. We need to have more energy in the form of ATP. That is our molecular currency. And we need to be able to transmit information back and forth. So if we can do those things to the maximum, most optimal way, we will be healthier. And what's good for the organs and what's good for the tissues and what's good for the cells is particularly good for the mitochondria. So if you're buffering your pH, how about buffering the pH of your mitochondria? How about giving a substance that we can measure now, we're going to talk about that later in the talk, that cranks up your electron transport chain and can really get that ATP out of the cell. And on top of that, the apoptosis with the pores in the mitochondria opening and closing into response to whatever danger they sense is also modulated by the carnosine. So these are just some snapshots of the studies. I just want to go back to this last slide here. I just want to say that this mitochondria here is not the mitochondria I learned about in medical school. Okay, what we know about mitochondria now is certainly not what I knew 5 years ago. Okay, we know that they can go to a place where there's trouble, talk to the nucleus, decide to fuse together, maybe get rid of some of the ones that aren't so productive, maybe send some genetic material back and forth, and all these signaling molecules floating around all over the place, trying to make things happen. And you know, in the words of Dr. Ted, the mitochondria really are not just the powerhouses of our cells, but they're our kitchen sinks and they're our computer circuits. And just because they don't have a roof over their own head, okay, and just because they're vastly outsized by the cell that it might contain, doesn't mean that it's not the boss. So this study here basically shows the protective effect in an animal model of a adriamycin damaged heart. And basically this shows us that when we pre-treat with the carnosine, we don't really get that oxidative damage to the heart. And in fact, we can crank up the contractility by 30%. Carnosine also helps to regulate calcium levels in the blood. It also helps to reduce the sympathetic tone of your body, so therefore it lowers your blood pressure. And very importantly, it prevents that reperfusion injury because it's such a good buffer. So this study here, really, we're going to talk more about the glycation in diabetes. We know that carnosine, through these papers that are available in carnopedia.com, can prevent the glycation from occurring in the first place. If it's happened already, it can remove it. It can help bring down your blood sugar. It can also regulate your insulin secretion and prevent complications from all those advanced glycated end products floating around in your bloodstream. So here's an example of that. We don't really want this glucose attaching to this protein. They get cross-linked. Wrinkles is a pretty good example of what happens when that happens. And of course, you end up with chronic inflammation and tissue damage. They don't really do any good for us. If you're diabetic, you have 3 times the amount of glycated end products circulating around your body, just waiting to cause damage. When we talk about structure, it's all different proteins. It's not just the collagen and elastin, but it would also be things that transport, things that signal, things that protect, things that help us digest. When I get back, I live in South Florida. A lot of PGA Tour members are where I live. In fact, there's more than a few winners exactly where I live. We have re-upped our WADA certificate here, the World Anti-Doping Agency, and we're going to be getting it to some tour players over the summer and some of the trainers of the tour players. And believe me, I think that is important, but in the overall scheme of things, not so important. Now we're going to talk about the brain. Okay, this is where I really think this Russian space medicine rock star peptide really shines. And this is where I think we can help the most people. We're going to talk specifically here about autism. We're going to lead into a little bit about mitochondrial medicine later on. But for now, I just want you to notice that a lot of oxidative stress, not a lot of antioxidant defense system. Okay, lots of free radicals, some genetic factors for sure. It is estimated that 20 to 50% of children on the spectrum do have some kind of mitochondrial dysfunction. It's going to be a very common theme. We can have exogenous sources and we can have endogenous sources of oxidative stress. What we've been finding when we give carnosine to these children, the last study published was by Michael Shez in 2002 in Child Neurology, and it hasn't really been studied since. I guess I'll just use this time as a spoiler. Next month, maybe literally tomorrow in June, we'll be starting a study of 35 autistic spectrum children from the ages of 2 to 7. And it's going to study the safety and efficacy in a prospective way of our combined antioxidant, specifically Carnosine Extra. It's not just autism, it's any neurodegenerative disease that we're talking about here. In Alzheimer's, we are subject to some heavy metals that are at an increased concentration. We have free radical stress with these free radicals getting in there and disrupting all of our lipid phospho bilayers, the so-called lipid peroxidation. And we also lay down some proteins that we don't really want in there. And that one is called acrolein. So we want to chelate, but we also want to anti-carbonylate. And that is when an aldehyde attacks a protein and makes it dysfunctional as compared to a sugar. And it happens to have excellent anti-carbonylating properties as well. In Parkinson's disease, we find interestingly that they have an increased amount of the carnosinase enzyme. That's not so good. Okay, Carnosine Extra is completely adjunctive to any treatment that you could possibly imagine. So, of course, you can continue to treat your patients with L-dopa therapy. It does help with receptors, as we mentioned before. So those glutamate receptors get overexcited, it can inhibit it. And in epilepsy, that's the most common neurologic disease there is. We find it to be very, very effective for seizure disorder. Again, it regulates these GABA receptors, and it can affect by both decreasing severity and duration. And in stroke, this is another rat study, and basically when they induced the stroke in rats, when they pre-treated with the carnosine, there was not as much lactate developed after the stroke occurred. Okay, not only that, they had a normal EKG and they had better flow as well after being treated with the carnosine. In terms of anti-aging, there have been many studies that shows with different animal species that you can extend the life of animal species 20 to 30% with carnosine. We went over this a little bit already, but basically it can really protect your heart and your brain and everything that you need. So we talk about, in my short experience in integrative medicine, we talk about a leaky gut. We talk about leaky blood vessels. We talk about a leaky brain. How about leaky mitochondria? Would you rather have mitochondria like this, or would you rather have mitochondria like that? Okay, and when we're producing just the right amount of free radicals, this is a signaling molecule. Okay, a certain amount of hormetic stress is necessary to keep the body working exactly the way that you would want. This is not. This is overloading our cells, and we're also not getting a lot out of it. Not a good investment with this one. So we're going to talk briefly about the other products, not to disrespect them, but I really want to get onto our own personal research. This is our Q10. You can see it is a combination of other agents, not just the Q10, and a very similar IP to prevent enzymatic degradation has been applied to all of our products, but it's the Carnosine Extra that's the true superstar. So we know that similar to carnosine, ubiquinone also reduces with age. And we know how important it is in that oxidative phosphorylation. Nothing new there. The colostrum is great. It's a 4-hour grass-fed, soon to be organic. It has about 120 different healing substances in it. I am currently using it to heal my gut, but I didn't start until I had enough power. And we also find colostrum to be very helpful for our overtrained athletes and for our autistic children, typically under the age of 5. Very anti-inflammatory as well. Here's our Stimino. We're using the Stimino a lot to look at jet lag. In fact, we have the whole Aura Ring team who goes from LA to Finland quite often. on it. We're going to be following up with them shortly to see how they're doing. But there's also a combination agent. It's really those reishi mushrooms and those bioflavonoids that give us the kick that we're looking for. Very good for inflammation. You can open one up, put it on a joint, wrap it with some coconut oil, put a saran wrap over it, go to sleep, wake up. You'll probably feel a little bit better afterwards. So Carnosine Extra and all of our Mitochondrial Rescue products are really based in mitochondrial medicine and diminishing the results of free radical oxidative stress. We know that we're on the right track because everything is energy. Okay, and you know, I was so specialized as an ENT surgeon, I would joke that I would be a right nostril surgeon, okay? Because it's more difficult if you're a right-handed surgeon to operate on the right side. So I was pretty specialized, okay? And so I'm very proud of my clinical career, and I had a very busy surgical career, and it's been almost 30 years. But I have to tell you, I have no problem moving aside, because this is much more important. You can help 200 people a year, maybe you do some procedures. How about helping 200 million people? So this is really how strongly we feel about it. We want to gain some of that energy and push it around amongst everybody. Everything is energy. We know, we're not going to get into too much biochemistry here, but we know that we take larger molecules, convert them to smaller molecules, and get energy out of them. We do know that there's 3 phases: glycolysis, Krebs cycle, and oxidative phosphorylation. This one does not require oxygen. These 2 do. The Krebs cycle occurs in the mitochondrial matrix, and the oxidative phosphorylation occurs in the intermembranous space. And both of these obviously require oxygen. I do have to throw this one slide up there. I think it's just fascinating to learn that we have about 20 to 50 electron transport chains in each mitochondria. And as Dr. Cowden was explaining yesterday, our mitochondrial DNA is naked. There's no histones. Histones kind of wrap up the DNA in our chromosomes, and they're very protective. They're kind of naked, just floating around in there in the matrix. So if we have these electrons, these electrons floating through, and let's say it goes a little not the right way. So these electrons can form free radical stress that can affect these naked mitochondrial DNAs that are floating around in the matrix, cause mitochondrial DNA mutations. And this is such an elegant system because what we're doing is we're just exchanging our highly charged molecules, our highly charged energy molecules, with the electrons as they float down the electron transport chain, and getting those hydrogen ions back into the intermembranous space. And we set up a concentration gradient here. Okay, and this concentration gradient does not allow, through this membrane, this hydrogen to get back in. The only way it can get in is through this ATP synthase. And when this occurs, it rotates counterclockwise, and we produce ATP. To think this is going on every second in our body is just really pretty amazing. I subscribe to the superorganism theory. So some of the principles of mitochondrial medicine we already talked about, but also important to note that we do, the mitochondria, they really keep our calcium level exactly where it needs to be. We know that the ionic calcium gateways are very, very important, in particular with the upcoming 5G that we have coming our way. This is a very telling diagram. It shows that, okay, we sequenced the human genome almost 20 years ago. We're really proud ourselves of that. But are we still producing publications regarding the nucleus? Not as much. How about the mitochondria? Oh yeah, a very steep curve up. So this is the theory of aging that we subscribe to. We know that free radicals have unpaired electrons, and they will do anything to get another unpaired electron and cause damage along the way. And if it happens in the lipids, in the lipid bilayer, the membranes get disrupted. If it happens all the way inside the cell in the mitochondria, you can get reduced mitochondrial function or maybe just more mutations. How about if you get something like a hydroxyl radical. Okay, you can directly oxidize your DNA. And of course, we talked about the proteins that can be damaged as well. So if we can really work on this electron dysfunction, we would really have better health. It's not a number. And here we have the cell danger response theory. The concept is that the mitochondria really do run the show. When they sense as something being dangerous, they'll get together and decide whether it's worth it to work it out, or maybe a certain segment needs to be sacrificed and just needs to die, or maybe it's just we just can't handle it, we're just going to go away now, and it's going to cause a cell death. So you have mitophagy to autophagy in that order. It's the mitochondria that make that decision whether the cell gets to live or die. Just another cartoon. We need to have a balance. Okay, we have to have a really good antioxidant defense system to balance out all the reactive oxygen species, all the oxidative stress, all the free radicals that we have here. And if we fall out of balance, we'll age. Okay, just like when you take a bite out of an apple. And when you have those kinds of processes occurring, when they become imbalanced, that is how you get chronic disease, of all the biggest categories. Here's just another, talked about it already, but it's really these mitochondrial DNA mutations that make the mitochondria not work so well. Get a leaky mitochondria and you end up aging. So that's just another, what we already talked about. We want to think about the human body as a car. Okay, we know the mitochondria would be the engine. Okay, and we know that the exhaust would be the oxidative stress, the free radicals. So what's the Carnosine Extra? Carnosine Extra is the oil. We're going to get into some of the research that we have been pumping out for about 2 years now. This particular one, I just want to tell a little backstory behind it. It's very close to my heart. And when our manufacturing partners started making Carnosine Extra, it's in an Eastern European country. They don't have access to the kind of healthcare that we might have, and obviously cost is always an issue. But they knew what it could do, so they distributed to a lot of developmentally delayed children, people on the spectrum, cerebral palsy, and they just wanted to see how it was going to go, and they started to get phone calls. Well, this person's moving better. They gave it to some MS patients that, something's going on, what's going on? And after really about 1.5 years of maybe not believing it, they decided to go to the government. They were a startup. They're actually the children of the war in Serbia. They're all in their early 30s, very highly educated, and they had a research grant for doing this current research right here. And in fact, our manufacturing partners right now are applying for the Innova EU grant for being innovative, and they've won several awards for being innovative. And just to complete something about the Republic of Serbia, it's the only GMO-free country in Europe. So the sourcing gets checked on the way in, whether it's from the country or not, and it gets checked again. And if for whatever reason something gets sent back because something wasn't labeled right, they get fined heavily. So this was a 3-part study where we looked at the antioxidative capacity of Carnosine Extra on several different types of free radicals. And we also looked to see what happened if we gave different doses of Carnosine Extra in a brain cell culture. And finally, we mimicked a MS model in mice with autoimmune encephalitis. And so we were measuring all these different free radicals. In particular, we talked about the nitric oxide radical being a very important modulator and vascular dilator, and also important in cancer. We talked about the hydroxyl radical. That is really the most dangerous, most powerful free radical molecule. And of course, we also talked about the lipid peroxidation. In particular, when we gave our exact same dose of 125 milligrams of Carnosine Extra, with other commercially available preparations, 125 milligrams of pure L-Carnosine and L-Carnosine and other food supplements, you could see that the Carnosine Extra was vastly superior in neutralizing this lipid peroxidation. We looked at the nitric oxide radical very similarly. Big difference in the neutralization capacity with the nitric oxide radical. And here we have the powerful hydroxyl radical, even here, very substantially different. And then we decided to take the Carnosine Extra and put it in with some neuroblast cells and different doses of the Carnosine Extra, and what happened? We found that there was an extremely trophic rise depending on how much Carnosine Extra we gave and how much growth we had in our neuroblast cell culture. It's like a brain growth factor. This is the autoimmune encephalitis. This is a very busy diagram, but just to show here, we have the naked axons here as a result of a complex immune reaction. Schwann cells and oligodendrocytes contain carnosine synthetase. Why would they? You know that those two cells produce the myelin, and we're talking about demyelinating processes here. And what we found was that at the control, as well as when we added the 2 carnosines a day, really didn't show too much difference. But when we hit that sweet spot of 6 carnosines a day equivalent in our animals, we definitely saw less demyelination and less inflammation. We know that the Carnosine Extra crosses the blood-brain barrier. Our research team feels that we keep the blood-brain barrier more intact, therefore keeping those white cells out of the brain. And at the same time, we did sections, and we found that there was no morphological or functional changes in any of these organ tissues after, I think it was just 25 days of Carnosine Extra in this experiment, and that's equivalent to about 2 to 2.5 years in humans. So now we're going to be talking a little bit about mitochondria and cancer. But before we get started, I just want to say that our manufacturing partner has figured out a way to examine the electron transport chain very specifically, complex by complex. We've also figured out how to look at mitochondrial respiration. We've also figured out how to amp up the mitochondria to see what it's doing. And so that's all been worked out, actually. And the thing with the mitochondria is that if you have dysregulation, if you have a situation where it's glycolysis, but it's aerobic, and you're making a lot of acid, and you are a cancer, and you're making very little energy, that's not a happy mitochondria. And that mitochondria has lost its, and maybe it can't tune into all the signaling molecules that are coming its way. It's not interacting with the rest of the mitochondria. It's just lost its way. Those mitochondria need to be rescued too, but they don't need to necessarily stick around, and that's part of the rescue. So this was a study where they did a very fancy software program where they took middle-aged rats, the equivalent of 43 to 45 years old, and they gave them 2 months of Carnosine Extra, but only 2 capsules a day. Not the sweet spot 6 capsules a day, but just 2. And that's the equivalent of, I believe, 5 years in rat life, okay? And what we found was that the rats that received just 2 capsules a day moved 40% more at such a low dose. Okay, that's intent, that's motivation. They needed to get up there and move. It wasn't just building up muscle mass or something like that. That's brain receptors. We also did a pretty extensive multiple sclerosis questionnaire on, I think it was around 250 MS patients that we have in Serbia that have been on this program for quite some time. And what we found was that in general, they were again, dose dependent, time dependent, 1 month, 2 month, 3 month, 4 month, that the people who considered themselves to be in good health was much higher than before they started. And the people who were in very poor health, after a few months, there weren't as many of them. In terms of pain, a lot less pain. In fact, absent pain, and not as many people in severe pain. In terms of energy, okay, after a few months, a lot of the patients had energy most of the time, and sometimes even all of the time. We do have some ongoing research on metabolic syndrome, which is both a mouse and rat animal model, but it's also 50 human models, 50 patients that have metabolic syndrome. So it's all three going all at the same time, and it started at the beginning of this month. And what we're doing is we're checking the antioxidant capacity, which we showed you earlier with the MS, but we're also doing blood biomarkers this time of glucose, insulin, leptin, and cholesterol, and we're doing 3 months of Carnosine Extra supplementation versus control. They're also doing the biological activity of simvastatin and metformin versus Carnosine Extra in this study. And we should have results by the end of the year. We expect these results to be groundbreaking. We expect these results to cause a big stir. And we're ready for that stir. We're okay with that. So just to kind of wrap it up, we really are very proud of our product. We're very proud of our team. We're very proud of our manufacturing processes and our scientific team in Serbia. They're really all about research and education. That's really all they want to do. So they pumped out a lot of studies very quickly, and we're just trying to figure out what to do with them. And Dr. Cowden has been giving us some very good advice with that, and we're getting some good professional advice as well. But we really appreciate all of you as early adopters. Yes, Lilius.
Could you just elaborate for people here a little bit more about what's happening to the MS patients, where they were and where they went to on the Carnosine Extra?
Well, there is a lot of excellent Serbian video testimonials that you could probably find if you looked with translations. But, you know, I would just say, Lilius, we're bringing more energy to the cells and we're just improving outcomes. Yeah, it's true. Okay, people are moving and people are much more functional, and I'm still trying to find the balance of what to talk about and what not to talk about. There is also, starting this month, I forgot to mention this one last study, they do studies, maybe 10 or 12 in a series, and they have a couple series going at the same time, but they have 3 MS patients that they're starting tomorrow with MR spectroscopy specific for carnosine. So we'll be able to not only follow them prospectively, we'll be able to see how much carnosine is lighting up in their head, essentially, from you know, doing the MR spectroscopy. Yeah, so we do have plans. There are other series of experiments that are in line, and we really do feel that we are a mitochondrial medicine supplement, so why wouldn't we be improving patients with mitochondrial diseases? You know, male infertility, I would say infertility in general. We have a lot of anecdotal cases now. It's been almost a year since I've been on it, and my family's been on it, and I've introduced it into my practice. I have a lot of chronic fatigue patients, autoimmune, allergy patients. I've been blessed to be very busy, so it was nice to figure out who could benefit from it and not. And I just want to say I think people are ready for this. People are ready for HRV-based dosage regimens. And if you were to look at our vision board, we do think that you could have a wearable that could hook up with your Google Calendar and tell you exactly what doses you need to take based on your schedule and what your needs are, what your travel plans are, what your work schedule is, and it's going to become quite normal. And what's going to happen with all this biometric data swirling around? Are we going to treat it like we treated it when the internet opened up? I think that's what's all coming about now, and the insurance companies are talking to Apple, and I just don't think that sounds good, to tell you the truth. We do, this is just a brief overview of the course that Dr. Cowden and Ann Sconyers were so wonderful to grace our presence with in Orlando. And that is available online. We're trying to make this as easy as possible. We have reserved our initial amount of machines specifically for ACIM. We feel very welcome here, and we want to start our imprint in what we can do here at ACIM. So we do have a number of machines that are on reserve for all of you here. So please let me know if you're interested. It is an online course. You can learn how to do the machine once you pass the course and decide to do either a travel one-day lab practical, or whether you just want to do a private session with Lilius. We'll just ship you the machine in half a day with her. You'll be able to get going. We have a very good Facebook community group. We have lots of videos on our website. We try to give as much support as we can. We do have some growing pains right now that we're working through, but I think it's going to keep getting better and better. And here's just some of our references. Thank you.
Any other question?
On the dosing of the Carnosine Extra, how are you optimally supposed to take it? Since it has a slower release, does it have to be every 12 hours, or can you take it just with meals and you're going to be okay through the night?
The Q10 can keep you awake, so you want to take it before 7. It depends on your routine. I take mine early. I take mine around 6 a.m. I wake up early, and I take my second dose around 3. Okay, so everyone is different, but BID dosing is just fine, and it's better to take with food though,
Okay.
you know.